Hi, it's a new week and new learning. We hope that you've been following and listening to the lessons on this channel. As usual, remember to subscribe. Now, we discussed about the scoring of dairy farm. How do we measure the performance? And we discussed three areas: feeding and rations, young stock management, and also the quality of forages. Now we continue to look at three more sections that we look at when we are inside a dairy farm. Remember, the purpose of this is not very much the score, it's about the actions that come after the score. So a good scorer will not just give you the score, they'll also tell you the recommendations. Now the first section that you look at in this episode is feed, planning and costing. We look at how the farm plans their feeds, the growing or the procurement. Growing because they could be growing on their own farms, or procurement because they could be buying some of their feeds, whether it is concentrates or forages. How do they plan? Is it a planned purchasing so that the farm is not at the risk of getting exposed to starvation, or a low season where they have to feed cows less feed than they require because they didn't plan properly? Are there contracts given to the people who supply certain feeds or certain inputs for feeding? And those contracts, how are they secured? Or do they just go to the market and pick whatever they can get? If that is the case, then we give a low score. If there is proper planning, we give a high score. But on the part of the feed planning is also costing. At what cost is feed bought? If it is too expensive, then we score the farm low because probably there's something they can do for the feed to be cheaper. But then we don't just look at the cost in isolation. We also look at the cost in relation to the market price. Someone could actually be incurring a high cost on feeding, and that is the reality of their environment, but then they could also be having a good price. So in the end, without the feed cost, they still have a profit. So it's good to look at the price in relation to the market, the price of selling the milk. So we also look at the cost so that we ensure that the farm is also doing as efficient as possible processes of feed planning and purchasing of feeds. Now two, we also check we also check about what kind of tools are used in that farm to be able to facilitate that kind of planning. Is it in the records where they're entering the amount of money they're spending, or are they having to think about the costing from out of their heads? So if I ask a farmer, I see you're planting your own alfalfa, I see you're planting your own silage, I see you're planting your own hay. Can you tell me how much yield you get? Can you tell me how much you incurred per kg of fodder A, per kg of fodder B, per kg of fodder C? If those figures are known, it then tells you that actually this farmer can be able to know the cost of the ration by the time it gets to the feeding trough. If they are not aware and they are just producing and feeding, they fall in the risk of running a loss-making dairy farm or not being able to implement a gradual improvement plan. So that means you get a low score for not knowing or being aware of the cost that you incur. Remember, it is not only the farm that buys fodder that should be able to be mastering the costs that they are incurring. It's also the farm that is planting their own. Now, moving to the second part in this area is about breeding and fertility. Very important section that we look at. How are the cows bred? Is there a vision? Is there a strategy in this farm to say that this farm focuses on a high-fat milk or high-yield milk? And did that actually determine what cows they are going to keep in that farm? Or there's no general focus and you just bring any cows you come across, you look at the farm and you wonder, were they planning to do high maximum milk production? Were they planning to do high butterfat? Were they planning to just buy and sell cows and so on? So there should be a general feeling that the owner of the farm has a breeding goal, and that actually informs how the breeds are organized in that farm. But also now, it is the efficiency of the breeding process. How accurate are they heat detecting? Are cows missing heats unnoticed, and then therefore failing to be inseminated and having long calving intervals? How we know this? We actually check. Out of every 10 lactating cows, which are maybe 4 or 5 years older in the farm, then we check how long are their calving intervals. If the calving intervals are too long, then there could be some issues. Maybe they are missing heats, or maybe there's some other management issues underlying, could be feeding and so on, so that we have cows having long calving intervals. We also check how is the recording of the breeding. Is it possible to be able to know the parentage of every heifer? Who is the mother? Who is the bull involved? What was the productive record of the mother? what was the highest production in the life of the mother, so that we can be able to see the profile of the heifer way before they give the firstborn. So it's very good to check where is the parentage of the heifers that are involved in the farm. If the cows have been bought, do they also come with their records so they can be able to determine what dam was used or what kind of semen was used? So the recording of the straws, very careful and very accurate, so that if someone is also buying a heifer from your farm, they are also able to go with a record of the parentage, and they can therefore determine the breeding procedures for that heifer. So breeding is a very important aspect, and here we look at the practice and also the principles of breeding that the farm has laid down to ensure that breeding is organized. They're able to get to as short as possible calving intervals. They're able to heat detect. They're also able to reduce the number of inseminations before conception. If you notice that there are so many inseminations before conception, then of course it's an issue and it has to be addressed. If you let it go, then you see a cow is being inseminated 15 times, the farm is not aware, and so on. So how well is it done? And then we also check, again, the awareness of the farm workers about the entire breeding story in that farm. Do they know how important it is to detect a heat? Some farmers actually give workers an incentive on how they detect heat, so that they are sure that every heat leads to an insemination. And then of course we also check how quickly do cows come on heat after calving, and how quickly do cows conceive after calving, so that within the number of days, as we said, 75 days, the cow is conceiving. And finally, we also look at milking, the milking procedures and the handling of milk, another very important section. There you have just to walk away from the barn and from the records which you are checking for breeding, and then you completely close that chapter and go to the milking parlor. Some farms are going to have a milking parlor. Maybe they're using a milking machine, others are milking manually, depending on the size of the farm or the choice of the owner. But then here we check are the practices. How do cows walk into the barn? Are they pushed? Are they having to be squeezed somewhere? Then how is the preparation for milking done? Are the workers dressed in a different gown, or are they milking in the same way they were sweeping dung out of the surface of the barn, out of the floor of the barn? How are they? How clean are they? Have they washed their hands before coming to the milking parlor? Then how are the equipment being used for milking? Are they clean and dry? Are they coming from a place that is well sanitized? And then from there, how do they prepare the udder? Are they cleaning the udder properly? Are they doing mastitis checks to ensure that we don't milk cows that have high somatic cells, or cows that are sick, milk that is not supposed to go into the buckets or into the cooling systems? So how are they preparing the cow? The CMT, the mastitis test, also checking whether the udders are clean. Are we able to are they cleaning using the same towel for all the cows, which is going to encourage infections, or are they using some dry towels to ensure that the teats are clean before milking? And then from there, how do they milk? If they're doing manually, are they squeezing or are they pulling the teats? Again, we give a score. For those who are pulling, we give a low score. For the squeezing, we give a higher score. If they're using a machine, how well are they able to listen to the sound of the machine to know when it is over milking or to know when it is not working properly? Are the workers aware of how the milking machine is supposed to work? Are they able to adjust it? Are they able to also call for attention from the technician to come and fix it? Again, that also means that the comfort at the milking, cows are going to be comfortable because the machine is doing its work properly. And then finally, we are done milking, and now we are looking at what we call the post-milking procedures. There are farms that do teat dipping, and others will just want cows to move out, and then they feed the cows after milking to allow the teats to be able to close to avoid any infections that may come, because cows, especially the heavy cows, tend to lie down after milking because they are exhausted, and that may mean that the teats, before they close, they are getting into contact with maybe a moist floor, and then you increase the chances of getting mastitis. So those are some of the post-milking procedures. Some of them can be dipping, and others can just be managing the period after milking to ensure the cow is not attracting infections. In the cases where milking machines also lead to the tanks, that is much safer. But then in cases where milk has to be handled, it has to be weighed, it has to be put somewhere before it is put to the cooling, then we have to check how hygienic is that process before the milk gets to cooling. And we also check what is the interval between when the milk left the udder to the time that milk is now exposed to cooling, so that we as much as possible, we discourage spoilage. Now here we score the best practices high scores, and then of course when you see bad practices or not so good practices, we score low. So what's important here is to check how you handle the milk and how you do the entire milking procedures. Also, we look at the comfort of the cow leaving the parlor. If the cows are having to leave by reversing instead of moving forward, and they're having to do unnatural movements for them to leave the parlor, again, we score low because we also want to encourage milking comfort. In this episode, we have discussed the issue of feed planning, we have discussed breeding and fertility, and we have discussed the milking procedures and handling. Those are 3 separate sections, again, which we score to be able to give recommendations for the farm to improve. And this brings us to an end of the second of this episode of benchmarking or scoring your farm to improve performance. Remember to subscribe so that we can continue supplying these lessons to you.